The night was still except for the crunch of her shovel breaking into the earth. Each thrust felt like an act of defiance against her pain, a rebellion against the memories that haunted every corner of her home. She was a widow now, and though weeks had passed since the funeral, her husband's presence clung to her like smoke that wouldn't disperse. His clothes still hung in the closet, his watch lay on the bedside table, and his laugh echoed in her dreams, only to leave her waking to silence. She had tried to move on, to push his memory aside, but grief was stubborn. It wrapped around her ribs until she couldn't breathe. Tonight, she thought, she would bury it. Not him. He was already gone, but the memories. The old letters, the photographs, the things too heavy to keep close. She had bundled them into a box and told herself this shallow grave in the backyard would be her release. Her hands were blistered, the wooden handle rough beneath her palms, but she kept digging. Dirt clumped into the folds of her dress, smudging her skin with streaks of brown. The night was cool, but sweat dampened her hairline, sticking dark strands against her forehead. She whispered to herself as she worked, half prayer, half plea. "This is the last time, the last night I'll carry you." Her words disappeared into the night, swallowed by the silence of the trees that loomed over her yard. She thought about the day she had married him, how strong his hands had been when he pulled her close, how sure his smile had looked when they promised forever. Forever had not lasted. Illness had stolen him quickly, far quicker than either of them had been prepared for. She remembered holding his hand in the sterile glow of the hospital room, feeling the warmth slip away, watching the life drain from eyes that once looked at her with such fire. Those images would not fade, no matter how hard she tried. The shovel pierced deeper, hitting pockets of resistance where roots tangled and knotted beneath the soil. She pressed harder, leaning her weight into it, her breath catching in ragged bursts. Her arms ached, but she welcomed the pain. It distracted her from the ache that sat in her chest, a weight no spade could dig out. Her body screamed at her to stop, but grief demanded more, and so she obeyed. When she paused to rest, she stood over the shallow pit, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. Her lantern, perched on a stone nearby, cast weak light across the earth, flickering every so often as if reminding her how fragile flame was. Shadows stretched long across the yard, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw his figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching. Her breath hitched, but when she blinked, there was nothing, only branches swaying in the wind. She swallowed hard, pushing the vision away. "Almost there," she whispered, stabbing the shovel back into the soil. The ground was softer now, damp from the rain earlier that week. She shoveled quickly, desperate to finish before her courage faltered. Dirt piled high beside her, releasing the earthy smell of roots and clay. She imagined lowering the box into the pit, covering it, and walking away lighter. She thought maybe she could finally breathe in a house that no longer echoed with his absence. Then it happened. The shovel plunged downward, and instead of the familiar resistance of stone or root, it struck something solid with a metallic clang. The sound rang out sharp and hollow, unnatural against the muted hush of the night. She froze. Her hands tightened on the handle, her body going rigid as the noise reverberated through the soil and into her bones. It was as though the earth itself had groaned in protest at being disturbed. For a long moment, she did not move. Her heart thudded in her chest, each beat louder than the last. Slowly, she knelt by the pit and brushed her fingers over the disturbed soil. She dug with her hands now, clawing at the dirt until her nails split and mud caked beneath them. The lantern's light trembled as if it too feared what she would uncover. The outline appeared gradually. Hard edges, corners, the suggestion of a container. She pulled more earth away, revealing the dull gleam of old metal. It wasn't stone, nor root, nor any natural thing that belonged beneath the ground. Her breath caught as she realized she had unearthed a chest, its surface tarnished but still sturdy, buried deep enough to suggest it had been hidden with intention. Her mind raced. Who had placed it here? How long had it been waiting? It was older than her marriage, perhaps older than the house itself. She felt a shiver crawl up her spine as she traced the lines of the chest, its surface cold against her fingertips. What secrets lay inside? The grief that had driven her to dig faltered, replaced by a new sensation, a blend of fear and curiosity. She leaned back on her knees, staring at the chest as though it might spring open by itself. The night seemed to grow quieter, as if the world around her were holding its breath. Even the trees had stilled, their leaves unmoving in the air. She pressed her palms to the damp earth, steadying herself. The box she had intended to bury, the bundle of her husband's memory, lay forgotten beside her. All she could see now was the chest, waiting in the soil like a secret kept too long. Something in her knew this was no accident. It was meant to be found, and she had been the one to find it. Her heart hammered faster, a rhythm that echoed the shovel's strike. She wiped her dirty hands on her dress, smearing streaks across the faded fabric, and leaned closer to the chest. The lantern light shimmered across its surface, revealing strange markings etched faintly into the metal. She had no idea what they meant, but she felt their weight. The night pressed in around her, silent and expectant. She realized she had not come here to bury anything. She had come here to uncover. The lantern's flame quivered, its glow painting the edges of the chest in a trembling halo of gold. The widow crouched closer, brushing more dirt from the lid with her scraped hands. Her fingernails were broken, soil embedded deep, but she hardly noticed the sting. Her breath rose in shallow bursts, misting the night air. She had expected to bury grief, to press memories under the soil and walk away lighter. Instead, the ground had given her something hidden, something that seemed to pulse with the weight of secrets. She leaned in until her forehead nearly touched the cold metal. The chest was large enough to have been placed there deliberately, and the lock on its front glinted dully in the weak light. She reached out, tracing its outline, surprised to feel a faint warmth seeping from it as though the earth itself had been feeding it all these years. Her fingers recoiled instinctively, her chest tightening with unease. She told herself it was just metal, rusted and aged, but her instincts whispered something else, that it was alive in its own way. The night had shifted. The cicadas that had sung endlessly in the trees had gone silent. Even the occasional rustle of branches had ceased, as though nature itself leaned forward, waiting for what she would do next. She became aware of the thundering of her own heartbeat, so loud she thought it might wake the neighbors, though the nearest house was far beyond the edge of the woods. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, her lips cracked. The grief that had weighed so heavily on her bones just hours ago had thinned, replaced by an unfamiliar sensation. It wasn't relief, not quite. It was curiosity sharpened by fear. She thought of her husband again, his voice in her mind, deep and steady. He had always been the rational one, the voice that anchored her when storms rose too high. She could almost hear him now, warning her not to touch what she didn't understand. But just as quickly, another part of her answered. He was gone, and all she had left was this moment, this strange discovery the earth had delivered. She tried to steady herself, drawing in a slow breath, but her hands shook as she pressed them against the chest once more. She pushed at the lid, but it didn't budge. The lock was firm, though not impossibly so, and it bore strange etchings, symbols she couldn't place, curling lines that resembled vines or flames. Her fingertips traced them in wonder. They felt too deliberate, too careful, like language carved by someone who intended for them to be read. But they were not letters she knew. She sat back on her heels, staring. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The question wasn't meant for anyone, but in the silence that followed, she half expected an answer. The lantern sputtered, its flame shrinking low before flaring up again, and for the briefest instant, the markings on the chest seemed to shimmer. She blinked rapidly, telling herself it was only her weary eyes, the exhaustion of grief layered on top of physical strain. But the shimmer remained in her memory, bright and impossible to dismiss. Her thoughts raced in wild directions. Could it be valuable? Was it some relic hidden long ago, forgotten beneath the soil of her yard? Had someone buried it here to keep it safe? The questions tangled and tightened inside her until her head felt light. Then a darker thought crept in. What if it wasn't meant to be found? What if she had disturbed something that should have remained buried? The air thickened, heavy as though the night pressed its weight directly against her chest. She struggled to take a steady breath. For the first time since she had unearthed it, a genuine thread of fear coiled through her veins. She glanced back at the house, its windows dark, its walls holding the silence of absence. She had dug here to escape those walls, to bury pain. Now she felt as though she had stepped into something much larger than her grief. Her hands itched to open the chest, to tear away the lock and uncover its truth. At the same time, Every instinct screamed at her to cover it again, to pile soil back over it and pretend she had never heard the metallic ring of her shovel. She hovered in that space, torn between hunger for answers and terror of what those answers might cost. Finally, she reached for the lock again. Her fingers closed around it, testing its resistance. It was cold at first touch, but as she held it, the chill gave way to a strange, subtle warmth, as though the chest had recognized her. She gasped and pulled back, her pulse leaping. The night swallowed the sound, her breath fogging the air as if the ground itself exhaled with her. She sat frozen, staring at the thing, the lantern's glow trembling on its surface. The symbols seemed to deepen in the flicker of the light, their shadows shifting like movement caught from the corner of her eye. She clenched her hands into fists, willing her fear to subside. She reminded herself she had already lost the one thing that mattered most. What else was there left to fear? Slowly, with deliberate resolve, she brushed the last of the dirt from around the chest. The earth gave way reluctantly, as though reluctant to surrender what it had kept hidden for so long. When the outline was fully visible, the chest sat there like a sentinel, heavy, silent, waiting. She stared at it until her knees ached, until her arms trembled from exhaustion. She wanted to open it, yet couldn't. Her breath came shallow, the night around her still as a tomb. She felt, in her bones, that whatever lay inside was not ordinary. It was not chance that her shovel had struck here. It was not mere soil she had been turning. It was memory, it was fate, it was something older than her sorrow. And it was waiting for her hands to lift the lid.